One of the things that I've encountered a lot as I've been slowly working my way through fiction, movies, shows, and of course video games, is that some things are considered bad in cultural consciousness, usually because of memes. There's obviously a lot of gradients here, and there's a lot of variability here, but it boils down to sometimes it's like, oh, well, such and such sucks. Why? Well, because everyone says it does. Or, oh, such and such is great. Why? Because everyone says it does. And I've encountered both sides of these, and I myself am just as guilty of this. I don't want to sound like I'm being like, oh, I am above and beyond. No. I do the exact same thing. It's one of the reasons why I constantly use that phrase, by memory. If you ever hear me say, well, I liked such and such by memory, what I'm saying is, I don't trust my opinion of that because I haven't gone through that with analysis mode. But obviously that takes a while to say, so I just say by memory, right? But if I have actually gone through something with analysis mode, then I can look at that and say, I trust that opinion. I could codify that as my real opinion on a particular work. So, to be completely honest, while I have played X7 myself before, once, I know it's a bad game. But it wasn't until I went through and analyzed it that I realized that, memes aside, this game is gutter trash. I've got the lighting set up just to make sure. This is full on, no really, Lamentation. This is terrible. I don't even know where to begin. We all know the behind-the-scenes stuff, right? Capcom was doing a major restructuring, which caused issues and influences to several of their other franchises at the time. This is about when Devil May Cry 2 was coming out. This was also when there were issues with regards to the Dead Rising series and some other problems that would be cascading after this. And we're basically entering the period where Capcom sucked. There were a couple of exceptions. Resident Evil 4 came out at about this point in time, too. But other than the exceptions, Capcom started doing a nosedive in quality overall. Naturally, they started turning it around more recently, and we've gotten some actually decent Capcom games in recent years, so woo! But I just wanted to point that out because part of the consequence of that restructuring was they had their specific studios, and this game was done by Studio 3. I'm not even going to name the games that they've done because you wouldn't have heard of any of them. But these games, these developers, they were kind of thrown to the wolves. Here, have a franchise which has been not selling well, and I keep putting that in quotes because the only issue was it wasn't selling particularly well in Japan. It was actually doing decently well worldwide. Not great, but still decent worldwide. But anyway, so, take this franchise, do something with it on a console we don't know much about. And it's a genre you don't know much about, and it's a specific franchise you know nothing about. Have fun, and the result is X7. Oh my god. I hate to keep emphasizing that, so let's try to jump into this for real. Let's just ignore all the memes. Let's ignore all the behind the scenes. We know it sucked. Okay, cool. Why? Most of the things that most people bring up are the obvious things. The fact that you don't get to play as X at the beginning, the fact that you have issues with aiming is kind of a problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. Usually people talk about how Flame Heinyard is super terrible. And that's usually the usual things that people bring up. Oh, obviously the voice acting is terrible and the voice direction is terrible. But those are the usual suspects. Let's actually analyze just how messed up this game is. We might as well start with the targeting because everyone mentions that. So there's an auto-targeting as Axel and as X. There is everything wrong with this. The idea of auto-targeting isn't itself necessarily bad. What is a problem is the entire way it's implemented. So it has a range limit. So you only target something within a certain range and a certain angle. You can't target something too close or too far or too up or too down. So automatically you're very limited in this in several respects. You find this out in the very tutorial stage where they have enemies you can't target unless you back off in order to target them. There's also the fact that the targeting thing makes this little beep every single time it switches targets, which is incredibly irritating and you'll be hearing it constantly. The audio spam in this game is real. Then there's the fact that I mentioned the range limit. Your gun can shoot farther than that thing can, and so can the enemies. So that's just kind of an artificial limiter by that. There's also the fact that you have to be aiming at someone, that is to say facing them, to auto-aim at them. Now, if you don't understand why that's an aggrieving problem, most of the boss fights actually, when you fight in a 3D space, you have to be running away from them, or dashing away from them to dodge their attacks. In other games with Lock-on, the way that works is the camera stays on them, or the lock-on stays on the boss while you dash away, and then once you're done dashing away, you immediately attack, and it goes towards them because you have them locked on. But this isn't a true lock-on. It's just an aiming reticule. So you have to then flip around and aim at them, which completely interrupts most of the flow of what you're doing, usually triggers an auto dash, even though you didn't want to, and also causes the problems of, well, running into the control scheme, which is terrible. This game is simultaneously too floaty and too heavy. I showed this off most especially in, I think it was the last Sigma stage, or the last Crimson Palace stage, where you jump up, and then you dash off, and then it's like you hit a brick wall in midair, and all of your momentum just drops. There's no smoothness, there's no arc to it, it's just, and then you just plummet like a stone. But that's the heavy part. The light part is, your jump up is slow, like really slow, and then it takes a moment, it just hovers for a moment, and then it plummets. So it is too heavy and too floaty. This is a problem in a game when you have to dodge attacks very quickly, and there are plenty of bosses where they will give you literally less than a second in order to dodge their attack. And they hit pretty hard, so you kind of want to not be damaged by those attacks. You want to dodge. So, okay, you go to dodge. Nope. And you're hit. I should also probably mention that the hurt boxes and hit boxes are all terrible in this game, so there's that. The inconsistency of it is the most obvious thing. There's times when you will literally be wall climbing on thin air, or trying to jump over an enemy and you keep running into them because their box actually extends out into the air above them several feet. Or how about the fact that some of the attacks seemingly just don't hit you even though you're standing right in them, or some of the attacks hit you even though you're several feet away from them. Then there's the fact. Then there's the speed. This is related to the dodging problem. When you are moving in this game, you are slow as molasses. Even when you're dashing, you have issues with that. Oh, by the way, dash is a commit thing in this, so once you start a dash, you can't interrupt it in any way, so you're just stuck dashing that way. So that can cause some problems in its own right. But the fact that you are so slow is not only irritating because it makes the game feel sluggish, just in general, but again, dodging attacks quickly, which it's hard to do when you're going... I should mention the sound design one more time, because one of the things I love in a video game is when I just hear this over and over and over as I'm walking around. This is great sound design right here. Especially when it's the exact same sound with no variance or cadence. You remember how in ZX and ZX2 I actually mentioned a positive for the sound design because they actually made it sound different based on what you were walking on, and most of the time you wouldn't even hear it. Like when you walk on carpet, there's a different sound versus rock or versus metal, and there's only like 2 sections that have carpet in the entire game, and they still did that. As opposed to... Then there's the fact that the actual weapons of this game frickety suck. Now, this is not exactly the only Mega Man game that has bad weapons, but I would say all of the weapons are bad to some extent or another. You've got the shield thing, which you can throw up at Stone Kong, which, by the way, does no damage at all to Tunyon, even though it's his weakness, and just kind of locks you out from that, so you can kind of shoot behind the shield, but because it's just there and it doesn't really block your whole body, it's not really that great and can be damaged by the terrain, so that's useless. You've got the water splash, which I don't even feel like I need to say anything about. You've got the ability to make an explosion right in front of you. Okay, that's cool. And I'm not going to go down those, but my personal favorite is the wheel, which is only barely useful in the 2D sections, but you can only summon the one wheel, and then it takes a moment, and then it runs off, and you have to wait till the wheel despawns to shoot another one. Now, that's a normal Mega Man thing. You'd only have so many of the weapon projectile on the screen at the same time. This was originally done back in the NES area, thanks to, limitations on sprite cap. But here, it's a design choice. It has been pretty much ever since. So that's, okay, 3 lemons at a time, sure, I get that. The thing is, the wheel keeps going for a while off camera before it actually despawns. So you're running around on the stage trying to figure out why you can't shoot because the wheel is still off camera somewhere doing its thing. Never mind on the 3D sections where the wheel just goes on one of the 8 axes you're facing and then just kind of rolls that way and then does its own thing and doesn't hit anything because screw you. It also has a very tiny hurt box, so it doesn't do jack to anything. All of this is just base gameplay. Just, if this game had the best levels and the best bosses ever, it would still be an aggravating aggravation to play. Never mind the fact that every time you walk over a dialogue trigger, you hear Alia say, by the way, she finally said her name, so it is Alia. Alia say, "Can you hear me?" Pause. And then she says your character name, Axel, X, or 0. And she says this every time you go over those dialogue triggers, every time you go through the stage. And then when you finish a stage, whether you complete it or die, every single time you go to the mission selection screen. And if you happen to get people you rescue, then it has to slowly go through the rescue people. Once that's done, if you got a chip, she has to explain to you what a chip is every single time. By the way, if you get more than one chip in a stage, she will explain what a chip is for each individual chip that you got. So the explanation you just got 10 seconds ago, you will get once more. This is a good time to mention that you don't unlock X until you get, I think it's 64 rescue Reploids, which, if memory serves, and please forgive me, I believe that's a bare minimum of 3 stages, but I know it's at least 4 stages through the game. So a little under halfway through the game is the first time you can unlock X to begin with, unless you're playing a New Game Plus, of course, just to mention that. So you can't play as X for half the game. Now, I didn't like this in X6 with the aggravation of unlocking Zero, and I don't like it here, especially since, at least with Zero, if you know what you're doing, you could get him on the first stage. Here, you literally cannot. It's not possible. You also have to rescue Reploids, which by definition gives you upgrades, which by definition makes X fall behind. Now, yes, I know X levels up faster than the other two, so he can get caught up better, but that doesn't change the aggravations of the design or why it works this way. Hang on, I got one more thing to complain about, because Axel is X, but worse. Now, this is something that by memory, you remember what I said, X8 did better. But I do know that in this game, Axel is literally just a worse X. He has a worse shot, which does less damage, and he has worse power-ups and worse everything. He is just a pathetic X. X is just better across the board. The other aggravation about that is, of course, the fact that Axel has this big ability thing where he can turn into enemies, and that sounds kind of cool. In fact, it sounds really cool. I really like that idea back in ZX2. I think they could have done more with it because, well, let's be honest, most of those were just gimmicks, and most of them were not useful except for like one specific screen. But at the very least, it was the beginnings of a cool idea. So being able to turn into your enemies, literally, cool. Problem, you have to shoot them with this specific shot, which you have to charge, by the way. So the charge can be interrupted. If you let go of the charge at the wrong time, you don't shoot it at all. Those enemies like to spam attacks on you while you're trying to kill them. The shot does very little damage, and when you change into them, they suck. Oh, also, while we're on the subject of them sucking, you also only get it for a brief period of time and then it's gone. The only time it's actually mandatory in the entire game is you need it on the cyberspace stage in order to get through the walls. Other than that, everything else can be gotten via some other method without even going into like speedrunning tactics. It's just you just go and jump down there and you get the item and you're done. So all of that sucks. Then there's the fact... Then there's the seconds and minutes problem. I've tried to describe this before. I just keep calling it seconds and minutes because it works so well. Everything in this game takes longer than it should. And that is the seconds and minutes problem in a nutshell. It's when you have 1 minute of time, and during this minute there's like a few seconds of padding. Which doesn't sound like much. It's like 3 seconds. Okay, whatever. But every single minute that passes, you get those extra 3 seconds. And it adds up. Every time you finish a stage, you have to go through, watch the rescuey thing, and say, yes, I want to save. Yes, I want to save. Back out of save. Back out again. Yes, I want to back out. Do I want to go to replay stage? Or do I want to go to the next stage? Yes, I want to go to the next stage. Are you sure? Yes. Loading. Load the next stage. Wait a second because it won't actually let you hit initially. Load up the party member. Wait a few seconds because it won't actually let you hit the party member initially and then hit the stage and then you can progress through the game. Now, all of that isn't egregious, but it's constant. And the whole game is like that. Even on the Switch, which I was playing here, I'm curious if anybody's played this collection on PC or PS4 or the Xbox. Even on the Switch, which is much smoother about loading times about every other game we've played so far, the loading times were awful in X7. We're talking about 8 to 9 seconds per stage. Which, again, doesn't sound like much, but it's constant. Every time you fight a boss, every time you switch between levels, or there's sections of a level, every time you load a level, it's that extra several seconds of just staring at a loading screen. I haven't even gotten into things like how the graphics kind of suck and are murky and how the camera has issues. I've been talking about, I wanted to talk about that one. One of the things people bring up is, oh, the camera sucks. And they usually use the intro stage as an example of this for good reason, because the intro stage is terrible. But there's 4 types of camera in this game. One is the 2D one, which we're going to ignore for right now. But for the 3D sections, there are 3 types of camera, okay? The first is the camera's right behind you, but a little bit too close and a little bit too down. That's irritating, and the camera likes to get stuck behind terrain, so you literally can't see where you're going, so that's bad. Then there's the close-up camera, where the camera's way up on you and facing down, and you basically can't see where you're going at all. which is extremely bad. But hang on, there's a third camera most people don't talk about because it doesn't show up all that often. The best example is actually the very final boss fight against the final Sigma, Armored Sigma, whatever it is. And when you're fighting him, the camera stays locked on to him. Oh, well, that's good. You finally can see where the enemy is no matter what. So, for those of you who haven't played this game to fruition, and I don't blame you if you haven't, in fact, I encourage you not to, but if you've gotten to that final stage, you know that, or that final boss, there's a bunch of platforms over an infinite death pit, right? So you have to be platforming while you're fighting him. You don't want to fall to the death pit. But the camera follows him, and he can go up into the air. Quite a bit, actually. You already seeing the problem? Here, let me try to really demonstrate this. Here's us, right? So picture this as us. We're here on top of it, and we're trying to jump across these platforms. He's up here, so the camera's now down here. So we're not looking at the underside of this platform. Or at the worst case, the camera's locked onto one of the other platforms, so we're just seeing up from here. So we quite literally cannot see the platforms we're jumping onto. Did I mention you have to jump on those platforms to dodge his attacks, especially while he's up in the air? All of this would be bad. And then we have why this game rated the way it did. I'm going to go and give away something. This is the worst game I've ever reviewed. So far, obviously. There's one other game that I kind of hope, but we'll see. We'll surpass it. We ride Hell Retribution. I don't mind giving it away. I'm just going to pull up this sheet right now because I actually have the spreadsheet I do where I keep track of all this stuff right here. And the net score on gameplay was a -50, which is a record. We've never had a game score that badly. But the golden number is the number that really matters. For a bit of context, previous to now, we've had 3 games that have had the worst total golden number. Those games are Quest 64, Drakengard, and Anthem. All 3 of those scored about -60. It's actually -56, -57.98, -59.8. So it's about -60, right? This game scored -103.56. Because here's the thing. Plenty of games have bad interface or seconds and minute problems or aggravating controls or bad camera or whatever. How many of those games also have virtually every boss fight in the game be bad and virtually every stage in the game be bad? We not only gave negatives for, I think, all but one of the stages in this game, we gave multiple negatives for several, like the area level or the ride chaser level. We gave multiple negatives for multiple of the bosses in this game because most of them were either boring or badly designed or legitimately irritating, like the Anteater, the Snipe Anteater. Ignoring the fact that he's terrible, there's also the fact that you're fighting on a cylinder and he can go under the cylinder. You can't. It feels like you should be able to, but you actually can't, and your weapons can't either. So he could just hang out down there and do whatever he wants and just sit there. And he'll have attacks which look like they're supposed to be hitting you, but they just hit the cylinder, so nothing happens. It's such an obvious buggy beta mess kind of a thing. But then you've got bosses like Red, who was the worst boss in the game. I'm going to really go into detail on this one, because we talked about the Mother Nightmare, and we talked about Gate and all that. I'm really going to dig into why this freaking fight is so terrible. So you've got a bunch of platforms, this should sound familiar, of varying heights, and if you fall off the platforms, you die instantly for no good reason. It's actually literally water, so it's even stupider than usual, but whatever. So, platforms, instant death pits. Sure. Problem number 1. Problem number 2 is you fight this in the 3D section. So this is a 3D boss, which means you're slow, as we've discussed earlier, which means your camera has issues, which we've already discussed, and it means that you have a little bit of a depth perception problem because of how the camera's angled, so sometimes it's hard to actually figure out where you're landing. Now, I'm not going to ding that part too hard, but I'm just kind of building up to the overall point. So what I'm trying to make it clear here is that even if the boss just stood there, just navigating this area is irritating or actually bad, depending on the specific thing you're thinking of, right? Then there's the boss himself. He does almost everything wrong in boss design. He has huge periods of invulnerability where you cannot hit him. He is pure random, so he can decide what to do, how he wants to do, however he wants it. Several of his attacks actually cannot be dodged depending on pure randomness. So if he teleports right on top of you, even if you're at the edge of the platform, some of his attacks you cannot dodge. Like if he teleports on top of you, you're at the edge of the platform, you dash out, he can still hit you if he decides to do his swing attack. That's going to hit you the end. He does a lot of damage, by the way. Oh, and he takes very little damage in return. In fact, even if you hit him with his weakness, he takes hardly any damage. That's a recurring thing in this game, by the way. Most of the bosses, if you hit them with their weakness, they take less damage than if you just hit them with a normal attack. What? Also, when you hit them with their weakness, they get huge amounts of iframes, like 5 seconds of invincibility. Now, that's been a thing for a while now, but just still, what? Anyways. So, okay, fine. You're going through, and he can hit you just based on RNG. He teleports around. He's got a swing. He's got a thing where he'll throw a shot at you. And he's got a thing where he'll summon ads, which will swing at you. They'll spawn right on top of you. And he's got a thing where he'll randomly throw up this whirl cyclone thing on random platforms. So when he teleports, if you don't see where he is, it doesn't even matter actually. If the camera is angled in such a way where all the platforms you're looking at are about to be hit by the tornado, naturally you jump away from those towards the screen, right? However, one of the platforms you're about to jump to might also be about to be hit by that. In fact, all of them could be hit by the whirlwind. So you're just kind of throwing the dice. Well, why not just turn the camera? The camera doesn't turn that quickly. And to be perfectly frank, you don't have enough time to. All of his attacks have extremely narrow windows of dodging them in general. So you're probably just going to get hit by it. Okay, fine. Then I mentioned the shot attack. So he has 2 of them. He's got a blast, which goes like this, which you can jump over, and something like this, which you can dodge to the side of. The timing for doing both of those is extremely tight. It is so tight, in fact, that the moment you see him winding up for the swing attack, you need to already be picking one and doing it. I usually went with jump because I don't actually have a good reason for that. Because it was the one I picked. So I'm at about 50% of the time I would successfully dodge it because I was already in the process of jumping. The other 50% of the time I wouldn't because he decided to do a swing. So, very hard to dodge for very many reasons on an area where he can knock you off into a bottomless pit while summoning ads on you, while RNG deciding sometimes to do literally nothing. See Gate for another good example. It's kind of boss design. And he can just decide to be invincible for huge periods of time. We made a really solid attempt. Walked in with a fully upgraded, as upgraded as we could get him, X, with 2 E-tanks, and I was doing pretty well. And then he gave me a really bad pattern and just was invincible for literally minutes at a time, because one of the things he can do when he teleports is does that whirlwind attack. And he is straight up invulnerable when he does that. So I just couldn't do any damage to him for literally minutes while I waited for him to be attackable. I did eventually die, of course I did, because I'm terrible at everything. But this is terabad boss design. Now, Red is the worst boss in the game. But I wanted to explain all of that and go in depth into all of that to really explain why this game is so much worse than all these other games. Anthem has a quest in the middle of it, which is really, really bad. A 3 negative quest, okay? Now imagine playing a game where that quest is repeated multiple times and you have X7. That is why X7 is worse. Because it's not just bad with a spike of terrible. It's spikes of terrible littered with bad. And what's really a damn shame is there are some decent ideas here. The ability to just switch on the fly between characters is actually a really cool concept. It is a natural evolution of the idea we've been evolving since X3. Right? X3, you had the 1 per stage thing. X4, you have the different companions. X5 and X6, you can change on the stage select. Here you can just switch between your 2 party members. That's really cool. The fact that you can just do that on the fly is such a cool idea and is actually a legitimate game changer and could have been a great thing for co-op, which they were actually developing for this game, but that got axed because of course it did. But instead it's terrible. All it effectively is another health bar, because remember, just like in X5 and in X6, those power-ups and upgrades you get don't share between party members. So, if you really, really level up your Axel, or your Zero might fall behind, or if you really level your Zero, your Axel might fall behind, or whoever you focus on, or you could just spread it out, in which case everyone's just kind of nerfed. So that sucks. So it just kind of forms an extra health bar buffer thing. And that's, of course, ignoring the fact that you don't even get X till later on. That's kind of related to this overall problem. There's also the fact that you just kind of respawn immediately right back into the boss without even a load screen every time you die. It's a form of a mid-mission checkpoint. Now, it resets everything. Excuse me. You do that with stages, too. You just kind of, and you just keep going. That's actually kind of neat. It helps with the flow, which is certainly something this game desperately needs better of, because holy crap. But I haven't even talked about the narrative. I used an analogy, or a simile, I forget which, on camera when we were talking about this on stream, and I'm going to share it with you now. If you sit down for a meal and someone doesn't serve you a meal, like there's no salad, or there's no soup, or there's no main course, well, that sucks. Negative to dinner. But that's it, right? If someone sits down and you sit down at the meal and they give you this rotten, toxic mess, which is guaranteed to give you food poisoning, That's multiple negatives. That's worse. You with me? Now, we could argue this, but that's the general concept, and that is the biggest reason why X7 rates worse than games like, say, Quest 64. Because someone pointed out, well, Quest 64 has no story positives. No, it doesn't. Because it effectively doesn't have a story. What little story is there is bad, but it's just a blank plate with like a napkin and a fork, and that's it. X7 has it actually has story, and it's terrible. The opening cutscene says everything that it needs to say about how awful this game is. I'm going to run you through a couple things. I cannot properly explain to you how bad this story is without you just watching the stream. So to really understand, please go watch the stream. I'm going to do my best to summarize, because that's the whole point of these ruminations, these post-game ruminations, is to summarize the streams. So I'm going to do my best here, so bear with me, please. You start the game, and it turns out that after the horrific nightmare level of, no pun intended, of being a post-apocalypse in X6, after 90% of all life on the Earth is wiped out, we're all of a sudden back to being a ghost-in-the-shell, paradise, cybernetic future city. Within a very short period of time, too. It's months, I believe. It might be years. It doesn't matter, because it's still stupid either way. We've just suddenly hit the thing, and we are no longer in Fallout, and we are now in Ghost in the Shell. Okay, that's jarring as hell. That's our first problem right out the gate. The second problem is we have an establishing scene, which does everything wrong narratively. One of the biggest pieces of advice I have given many writers, and I know I've said this before on camera, is don't rush to the good stuff. Take your time to establish before you pay off. Too many writers want to rush to the good stuff. They want to rush to the payoff scenes, the big scenes, the impacting scenes, the scenes they really want to write. But what they do is they don't build it up, so it has no impact. It has no cool factor. It's not interesting because they didn't earn it, right? Now, there are ways around this, and truly talented writers can do that. That's how in medias res works. But the point is, build up, then pay off. So we have a scene in this where we see Red going after what we presume are some criminals. Actually, I only know that because of the works outside of the work. So just going after two people, murdering one of them, impersonating them, and then using that impersonation to murder the other. The very next thing we get is a slow, boring narration about how X has quit being a Reploid because he hated X6. And, he's quit being a Maverick Hunter because of how much he hated X6. And, okay, and then there's this new group called Red Alert, which has been being a vigilante group. Okay, cool. But then Axel flees from the group. And then we cut to Axel, who's running from something. It's presumed that these are Reploids that have been sent to chase him by Red Alert, but that's never actually confirmed. It's just kind of implied. All right. So our very first, you see why I brought up that build-up payoff thing, because our very first thing we established for Axel, is that he's a vigilante, and then he's fleeing from the vigilante group. Okay. This is not even touching on just how legendarily bad the voice acting, the voice direction is. All memes aside, it's bad. It's so bad. It's not so bad it's good. It's not so bad it's funny. It's just bad. Then Axel rushes into his hero, Zero, and acts like he doesn't know who he is. Rushes away and then says to his hero, Zero, "You're Zero, so you can do this." Then we have a scene where Axel is imprisoned and they try to, say, you've done horrible things by causing damage, I guess is what they were after him for on this one, by virtue of running from people who are trying to kill him. And X, of course, says, "I don't want to fight because I'm dumb and stupid." And they're all like, we don't want to deal with you. We just want you to go away. And Axel says, "Well, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to Red Alert." Then Red Alert calls up and says, "Hey, we're going to do a thing. We're going to go off and we're going to have all our people here causing damage or killing people." They're never really clear about this. Something's going to happen. And this is now a game. You need to defeat our people or our people defeat you. If we win, we get Axel back. If you win, you can keep Axel. Please keep in mind they don't want to keep Axel, but they apparently don't understand the concept of imprisoning and shipping him back to Red Alert, which isn't a valid option at this point in time. Okay, whatever. So then they decide, okay, well, we've got this criminal who we don't want, who we have to fight for. Let's let him fight these people alongside us because that makes perfect sense. Then we go out and fight them, and in between every stage, we get a cutscene between Axel and Zero. Now, on the one hand, this is actually kind of cool. Having this kind of story development in between stages helps to keep the narrative flowing throughout rather than just having a bunch of story at the beginning having a bunch of story at the end, and usually one little cutscene in the middle, which is the usual standard for the Mega Man format, 1, 2, 3. Instead, we kind of split it out a little bit, so that works. Cool. The downside is every single one of these cutscenes is the same cutscene. Not literally. So, Axel, what you're saying is you left Red Alert because they were getting suspicious? Yeah, but they didn't used to be. Next cutscene. So yeah, everyone at Red Alert was a really good friend of mine, but then they started being bad. I see. Next cutscene. So what you're telling me is that all of these people used to be good. Yes, but they're not good anymore. Next cutscene, and you get the point. All of this is being done through either stills, which actually works okay, or terrible animation, which doesn't, on top of dead, faceless, terrible 3D models and awful voice acting. Then, X decides to join the party, which is treated like a big moment, even though it isn't. Then we get to the end, and Red's there, and he's like, hey, Axel, you go run with those guys. I've set this place to self-destruct. No reason given. And I'm going to stay behind and die with the castle. No reason given. Okay. We can infer reasons for some of these things, but as presented in as presented in the game, we get nothing. Then it turns out Sigma's been behind it. This is super shocking. I know. The game doesn't even try to hide that Sigma's behind it. It gives it off very early on. Like the first Red cutscene we see sees Sigma walk up to Red and say, like, hey, I've got it. And Red, who is a world famous Maverick hunter, who has become a vigilante and been fighting Mavericks for years or whatever at this point, doesn't recognize Sigma on sight. Sure. And then Sigma's like, I'm evil, and I'm going to kill you for no reason. Oh, okay. And so then they kill Sigma, and then Axel's like, hey, I'm going to trick you, but then I'm going to kill you. And then the ending is such a nonsense burger. It's just a nothing burger, right? It's like, oh, right, Axel is trying to do all these things to help and fight the Mavericks. And Sigma says, we should make him a full Maverick hunter. And Axel is like, no! And Cygnus is like, well, okay, maybe you could train him. And X is like, no, I can't train anyone to be a hunter like me. Which sounds incredibly egotistical, which is funny because it's actually true, but it's okay. And then the game ends, the end. No character growth, no arc, no significance, no nothing. This is a filler episode. It doesn't fit with the rest of the series at all. It introduces a brand new character who's young and cool and hip and cool in order to be cool and hip and young and cool, who fails at every step of the way because the game will just constantly tell you how cool Axel is without actually showcasing him being cool. And then the game ends with nothing having changed and nothing different. If you completely eject X7 from continuity entirely, X6 still flows better into X8, even though X8 still has some problems with it, by memory. Narratively, this thing is a piece of trash that is currently on fire and being pissed on by the gameplay, which is worse. I hated this game. And I'm dropping my tone here to make it very clear that this is no longer memeing and no longer joking. You probably want me to joke about Flame Heine art and how funny it is that he says burn to the ground over and over. Have you played that fight? Because that's actually the second worst boss in the game. Let me walk you through that fight really quick, okay? So, he summons his ads. They have a ton of health. They are the source of the audio spam. Every time he does any action, he says woo, burn, or burn to the ground. So you just hear this non-stop cavalcade of audio spam. This is on top of the fire sound effects and the ka-chunking of the giant mechanical hyena in the background, which is there for absolutely no reason. You shoot the hyena, jump up on top of it, very easy to fall off because of the camera. And then you get up there and he walks out. He's fully invincible, of course, until he summons his ads up there. And they start running in a circle around you, constantly spamming audio spam. Then, if you happen to figure out which one is the accurate one, good luck doing this on Zero, by the way, you have to do damage to him very slowly because it takes forever to take damage. And if you hit him with his weak point, all he does is pause with 5 seconds of invulnerability and then resummon his ads. So that can make the fight boring, but not much better. As he's doing this, the giant mechanical hyena starts moving forwards again. This is when the physics comes in, because every time it does this little kind of hop as it's moving forwards, you don't go with it. So you just kind of slowly lose position on the platform you're standing on bit by bit as it physics out from under you, inch by inch. Which is actually really frustrating because you're fighting this in the 3D plane, so you're slow. So unless you're dashing, you're actually net losing... well, that's not true. That's not true. You're walking so slowly that it feels like you're losing ground. You're not actually. You are slowly getting back to the front of the platform. But it's also an impediment for dodging his attacks, which, as I mentioned, are very quick. And good luck even seeing the fire attacks because of the bad resolution graphics on those. It is a long, slow, boring slog of a fight that takes forever, and the entire time you are constantly hearing this audio spam in your ears. It is a terribly designed boss fight. And that's this game in a nutshell. No matter how much we meme on it, no matter how much we joke about it, it is still garbage underneath it. I hate this game, and I will never replay it. Later today, this afternoon, we will fire up X8, which I have very few memories of, admittedly, because X7 destroyed a lot of my interest in this series. So we will see what we think of that one next time.